Hello again, everybody. Um, I'm back for a second video sharing a little bit about my journey with depression and anxiety and how it worked for me, sort of what happened. And last video, I shared, if you haven't seen that yet, just did a live video a couple days ago where I shared a lot of my story, and I shared quite a bit about what 5 months of debilitating anxiety, debilitating depression, spiraling anxiety, and paralyzing fear looked like for me. And then I finished up with this image about being in the forest. Really, where I left it is that idea that when there is these moments of anxiety and fear and worry and panic and depression, first to understand that we can have self-compassion on ourselves. We don't need to self-condemn. We don't need to just totally destroy ourselves, because that's what keeps us in that spiral. That's what kept me in my spiral. I just was so self-condemning and just destroying myself and speaking so negatively to myself, and not able to accept the fact that I was struggling with these things, and it was okay too. I couldn't give myself compassion at all. That's the point we get to, right? The point that where I was able to actually start to make some transitions for my life was that it's okay to really feel and express emotions. It's okay to sit in that and be part of that, and just let yourself feel it and have compassion on yourself. Whatever situation that might be for you right now, whether you're feeling really scared about COVID-19 or the situations of COVID-19 are making you feel certain ways about yourself, and you just speak very negatively towards yourself, instead of letting that negative emotion, instead of letting that emotion turn into self-condemnation, just give yourself some compassion, give yourself some grace, and let that happen. It's okay to feel and express your emotions. But the next part of the story and the next part of the image that I wanted to share with you is something that I think is really, really helpful in how you actually move forward from there. Because if you remember the image, it was me panicking and being lost in the woods in the darkness, just broken, in fear, calling out, wanting anything in the world to do just to be okay, because I was lost and I didn't know where I was, and I felt like I was doing what I was supposed to be doing, and I didn't know where I was at all. It just felt like everything was wrong. And first, giving that sense of grace and compassion to say, however long this needs to happen, however long it takes to really let this out, to really feel these emotions, to really let myself cry, or let myself weep, or let myself shriek out, or let myself get out what needs to get out, and let those emotions happen. However long that takes, that's okay. We can have compassion on that. I can have compassion on myself on that. That's totally okay. But there's the next piece to it. The next realization is that we have to have some sort of ability to learn how to compose ourselves, because we can't just be stuck in places of shrieking panic, right? That's not going to be sustainable. That's not going to help us move forward. And our goal is to be able to come back and to be able to move forward again, right? Goal isn't to stay stuck in panic or in fear or depression or anxiety, because no one wants to. We know what that feels like. It feels not good. We can have compassion on ourselves in the middle of it, but it doesn't feel good and we don't want to stay there. So how do we move forward? For me, that's what I was struggling with for so long. I just wanted to move forward, but I couldn't move forward until I gave myself compassion. But I really sensed God speaking to me in that vision and saying, you can't move forward until you figure out how to compose yourself and find some sort of composure. I wouldn't be ready for the GPS to reconnect. If you remember that image, I wouldn't be ready to see it and to be ready to make a move on it if I'm just freaking out and panicking. I'm not ready. I'm not looking. I'm not composed enough and wise enough to be aware. And so again, as long as it takes. But what does composing yourself really look like? For me, it really involved, in addition to the compassion pieces, it involved a spirit of curiosity. is the best way I can say. A spirit of curiosity. It also involved like being able to go to spiritual direction, still go to counseling, go to therapy, have meds with a psychiatrist, and one of the other things I started to do is I really started to figure out ways to care for myself. And I had been through all of these months and I hadn't really taken a break. I hadn't really given myself the space to get out of context a little bit. And so for 4 straight weekends, I ended up either going to visit a friend I visited one friend in Louisville, one of my best friends who just knows me. Just spent about 4 or 5 days visiting him, and it was the best thing I could have done. The next weekend, my other best friend came up from Chicago, and we hung out all weekend, and we had spaces where I wasn't constantly processing and thinking and focused on all of the things that had been going wrong. The next weekend, I went with another friend from high school, one of my really good friends from there, and him and I spent about a day where he is, and it was out of context again, and then went on a retreat, and just a lot of different things that helped me get out of context and helped me stop being. It just gave me breath and places with people who really, really, really know me to kind of just exist for a little bit and to not be so focused on trying to be something or do something to perform in any way, but I could just really be off and I could just be me and have space to relax a bit, have space to not be so focused on all the different things that were really, really bothering me or different ways that I was struggling with depression and anxiety and all that. And so those are one ways of composing myself, of getting myself to breathe a little bit, in that image of the woods, like you kind of got to say, okay, all right, calm down, let it out. And then, okay. That was one way of doing that. But I think a really strong posture of what composure looked like for me and continues to have to look like, it's the way I've sustained a lot of what I've been doing is a posture of curiosity. Curiosity in the sense that when we have these emotions come up, we begin to ask, instead of saying, no, they should go away. Why are they there? They should go away. Or, oh, you're so stupid, or letting them feed all of that negative feedback. It's a way of being able to ask curious questions about them. To ask the questions, why am I feeling this way? Why is this coming up? Why is this causing such struggle? Again, not in a shaming way, not in a pointing finger at yourself way, not in a really hating yourself way, but in a really compassionate way. Why am I feeling this way? Started to identify anxiety in particular, not as something that I wanted to stick around, and not as something that was like, oh yes, I love when anxiety is here, but it's almost like it was alarm. It was a pointer. It was a part of me that's trying to help me. And for someone who's prone to anxiety, it can be hard to think of it that way, but it's like thinking about your pain system, right? Like when you touch an oven, when you have something hit you and it causes pain, it's trying to warn you and say, hey, don't do that. That's going to hurt you. That's not helping you. And the pain, while it hurts and it sucks and it doesn't feel good, it's trying to alert you to not continue in the same patterns or to not do what you've done. And I think a lot of times anxiety feels that way. It's not something that you shout down. It's not something that we should just try and be like, hey, I hate you. I want you to be gone completely. All that. It's something that we look at and we say, okay, you're back. I don't know. Sometimes people refer to it as a friend. I don't know if I'd referred to it as a friend because it doesn't feel like it's a very big friend, but it is trying to point out when I'm prone to jumping in somewhere, or when I'm prone to continuing patterns, or when there's something that's not right and I need to pay attention to it. So I think when I have anxiety about specific issues, that's like the piece that needs to be really, really curious. What is it about this specific thing? If there's something that I'm spiraling on, and oftentimes for me, like I had very specific things that I was spiraling on. It had to do with different people in my life. It had to do with different job things, and it had to do with different work things, and it had to do with different identity pieces and pieces going on within me. Had a ton of stuff to do with very specific, concrete issues. I think a lot of the time we, when we're depressed and anxiety, It starts as there's a lot of different issues that have come up. And when we don't, can start with anxiety, and things come up and it's hard to work through them. And then from there, if we don't figure out how to healthily deal with them, if we don't figure out how to curiously deal with them, they can spiral and they can turn into that chemical imbalance that turns into depression. Now, I'm not a doctor, I'm not a therapist, I'm not a psychiatrist, so I don't understand all the details here, and I'm not speaking for each situation. I'm not speaking for how it works for everyone. I'm just telling you what my experience was. My experience was that I felt like there was so much going on at a point in August that I was struggling with, that I didn't know how to handle, that it threw my chemical imbalance off, and I just stuck into this depression piece, and it was really, really hard. And the way that I could really begin to address it, in addition to the medicine, in addition to all that, was through the work of therapy, through the work of spiritual direction, and the spirit of curiosity that really would say, what about these places is causing me to have such anxiety? And I think the posture that that curiosity has to take is through another word, courage. I don't know why all these words have all been C, like the letter C starts them all. I'm not trying to alliterate, but those, for some reason, all the words that have really stuck out to me at the different points in different months start with C. I don't know. But courage is the big piece that has to fuel the curiosity, because we have to be courageous enough, and I had to be courageous enough to self-evaluate, because a lot of the things that were causing me issues, or a lot of the things that I was saying, oh, this is just happening to me, I would blame a lot of it on, whether it was spiritual, I would blame it on spiritual warfare, or I'd blame it on someone else, or I'd blame it on someone else's issues, or something like that. But in reality, I don't think I was really evaluating myself. I don't think I was, at a lot of the points, I wasn't courageous enough to be doing that. And it took a lot of time to develop up that courage, to be courageous enough, to be curious enough, to look at myself fully, transparently, not blaming anyone else, not worried about being responsible for anyone else, not trying to do anything for anyone else, because you're only responsible for yourself. Anxiety and depression, a lot of times it feels like you're unresponsible. You're unable to control a situation, and things just happen to you and you can only receive them. When in reality, we're responsible for our own healing, our own growth, our own ability to respond. And we do have the power to respond. We do have the ability to be courageous and have courage enough to look at ourselves with curiosity, to look at ourselves as we need to, and to be courageous enough to look at different places in our life that aren't right, that aren't necessarily our fault, but that we're responsible for how we respond to. And so for me, I just felt like a way forward, a way to continue moving forward, and how to compose myself was to be curious enough and courageous enough to look at myself and fully self-evaluate, fully transparent. And it wasn't fun, because there were a lot of things about myself that I realized had been patterns that I had continued to perpetuate, that I wasn't courageous enough to look at fully, that I wanted to, that I just wasn't courageous enough. And not in a self-shaming way. Again, like when we look at the curiosity and courage and we think, you're not being curious enough, you need to really do this, that doesn't help. When you're not courageous enough to do this, that doesn't help, because it's not out of a spirit of compassion. But these things have to be out of these spirits of compassion. And in light of the image, again, we have to compose ourselves through this, because when the GPS comes back, again, let's think about the image. I felt like that image of when it was spinning and it wasn't loading and I was panicking and I was freaking out. The GPS signal will come back eventually, or at some point it's going to, right? But we have to be willing to try and figure it out. Let me see if I can frame it the right way. Like, we have to try to figure out how to compose ourselves, and we have to try and figure out how to get it to realign. If we stay in the same spot, it may not ever realign, right? Because that might be that spot, or that signal is lost. But we need to be able to take the steps to try. God doesn't care about, or I've heard it talked about in a parable specifically recently, that in God's economy, the only way you fail is if you don't try, if you don't try and move forward. And so the purpose of being courageous, the purpose of being curious, is for that point of being able to try and break free of these things. Let's say another thing. It took a lot of courageous conversations, and conversations for me that weren't easy and may not even looked great in the first spot. Trying to figure it out, but we have to have conversations with people. We have to have conversations with ourselves and look at ourselves, because I had to look at myself a lot and be and try to help work through things myself. And so in the midst of our anxiety and our depression and our fear, I think it's just so important to be curious enough and courageous enough to try to find composure, to open ourselves up, to look transparently at ourselves, and to try and help figure out when the GPS is going to align. Because when it comes back, it's going to if we've gotten off course, the GPS is going to help realign and redirect us. I believe that about God. I believe that if we try and we're off course, God's going to help reshape us. He's going to, just like a GPS will say, "Oh, you're off course. Let me readjust, bring you back." It's always there. I think that's true about what God is. That if we push and we try and we work to honestly, courageously, curiously work our way through, He's going to help realign us as the signal reconnects. Again, this is not driven out of fear and anxiety. For that, when it's driven out of that, it continues that spiraling. But out of peace, we get when we compose ourselves. We compose ourselves through curiosity and courage. I hope that makes sense. It's really, really hard. I think I learned more about myself through this process, through looking at myself, but it was not fun. I did not like it. It led to freedom, but it was very, very difficult. And it really takes courage to really look at yourself and go, you know what? As much as I want to blame other things, and again, not putting all the blame on yourself. I hope you understand what I'm saying when I say this. It's not about self-shaming, self-condemning. It's not about that at all. But it's willing to look at ourselves and think, how can I grow? Where is it that God really is rooting something out of me? A pattern that I'm falling susceptible to. A way I relate to others that isn't great, isn't right. How do I really be open and honest and transparent and look at my whole self? For me, that ended up, and I'll talk about this in the last video that I'm going to do, was it ended up resulting in being able to name and be curious enough to tie all these loose ends together to understand that what I really struggled with and what was my core issue that was coming out in so many different ways was codependency. That I was finding my worth, my value, my identity, everything in being things for other people. It was really hard, but I had to. I think my therapist probably told me. I think she told me like numbers of times that was my issue, either more directly or lessly, or not. Again, therapists don't do it, but like she was helping unweave that, and could even say, but I wasn't ready to hear it. One quote that one of our pastors on our staff shares that I'm not sure, that I think he got from somewhere else, so I'm not sure where the original source is, but he says, when the student is ready, the teacher arrives. And so until we're ready to transform, and until we're ready to try, and until we work up the courage and the curiosity to work through things, we're not always ready to change or to work through a lot of the issues. So again, as long as we need to have compassion on ourselves, to let ourselves feel through whatever we need to feel through is important. But from there, we have to compose ourselves to be able to make the wise choices, to be able to take the next steps, to be able to grow. And those come through what I would consider postures of curiosity and empowered by courage. All right. Thanks.